Hey everybody. So today, this Astroasis Oasis electronic focuser, it's out of here. That's because Astroasis sent me their Generation 2 Oasis focuser. We're going to open this up, take a look at what the differences are, and get this new one installed here on the EdgeHD. My name is Doug. This is AstroAF. All right, we'll get a quick unboxing out of the way here. As always, I just really appreciate Astroasis and their recycled packaging material. But without any further ado, all right, and they've always got the very nice fitting box. And we get the Astroasis parts list. And then again, I always appreciate their packaging. Each individual item parts is in its own box. It's labeled. We have our clamps. We've got the main assembly, which we'll have a look at here. We'll have our gears or screws, our USB cables, temperature probe, and hex keys that they send along with it. And this is probably screws here. Oh, this is the plate they sent me because I have the EdgeHD installation, and this is a new improved plate. And I gave them some feedback on this plate because the recess here, which is where the bearing from the EdgeHD focus shaft sits, is very, very shallow, which so is the one that comes from Celestron. And I told them I thought it would be an improvement if they made this a little bit deeper so we had real positive set of the bearing inside here. And they actually did it. So I'm really happy to see that. But then the focuser body itself, we have the gear locator and then the focuser body. And this is quite a bit smaller. They have their standard gear assembly inside here. And so the changes that they've made back here are that we now have USB-C instead of the USB-B. We still have the temp probe port. We have a power input here for 12 volt DC, but as I understand it, and I'll verify this, is that this is no longer needed. If you wish, you can power it via the USB-C as well and eliminate the need for one cable. So I will verify that and make sure that is the case, but that is what I believe I read. All right, so that's basically the focuser. And of course, yeah, so we get our USB-C to USB-A cable here, and we get our temperature probe. A nice temperature probe cable. These are various size gears. I'll need to do a little reading on that to see what I might need, but this will be for different types of telescope focuser assemblies, and I'll need to determine which one I need. We have the hex keys they provide. Here's a box of screws, and this is the clamp. This in combination with the screws, this will attach to the base plate that's on my EdgeHD. So there's 3 screws here that screw into this main focuser body, and then this will attach to the telescope via this clamp. It's a real slick system. It works really good. Okay, that's it for the unboxing. So what my objective is today is to show you the differences between the Generation 1 Astroasis focuser and the new Generation 2 Oasis Focuser Rose. And I'm going to install my Gen 1 version back on my refractor telescope. And I have a video on that I'm going to go ahead and direct you to. I'll put a link up here. And that goes through an installation of this focuser on my refractor in 20 minutes. And I could probably do it faster now since I've done it before. It is not a difficult level of installation. So there's just a few screws, and it's really fairly straightforward. So I'll also put a link to the documentation down in the description. But I did want to do a quick compare, because the most notable difference between the Gen 1 and Gen 2 is the size. And as you can see, if I line these up pretty close, the Gen 2 is significantly smaller. We have the Gen 1 at about 77.5 millimeters, and this Generation 2 focuser is about 62, let's see, about 62.75 millimeters approximately. And I'm excited about that because this will help with some clearance issues on my SCT with rotation and things like that. And they've also, as far as other comparisons here, is on the back end here. So we've got on the Gen 1, which is here. So we've got the USB-B connector, and then we've got a 12-volt input for power. And this is a temperature probe here. Now, on the Gen 2, we have USB-C, and this is both data and power. So you don't have to use the 12-volt here if you don't want to. This will supply the power as well if you have it available in the port that you're using. And then it also has the temperature probe right here. So those are the main differences. They both still have the clutch. So you can rotate and engage and disengage the Gen 2 just as you could with the Gen 1, just by rotating the focuser body. It's interesting, they have like a knurled edge right here that you can grab hold of to turn this with. That has gone away on Gen 2, but I don't think that's really a problem. It doesn't really need that knurled edge to get a grip on it, and it's not hard. And I engage and disengage this all the time, especially on the SCT if I'm switching between native or reduced, or if I'm going over to the hyper AF, then I always have to disengage this and then manually focus to get close, and then I'll re-engage this to then get set up for autofocus. So super handy. If you were doing visual and you wanted to disengage this, then you could certainly do that. And you could pop in your eyepiece and then manually focus as you would. And when you switch back to for astrophotography, you could, get your focus, re-engage this, and you're set up for autofocus again. So it's beautiful. So what I want to start with is to go ahead and do the install on the refractor. And I'm going to kind of speed through this, because I've got the video already that you can go back to and check it out if you need to. I'll talk a little bit while I'm doing this. Anyway, we'll get into the installation on the refractor first, and then I'm going to come back and then I'm going to go through and I'm going to install the new Gen 2 on my EdgeHD 8 SCT. And we'll go through that. And I also have, it's going to be a little bit deeper because I have a redesigned focuser mounting plate that replaces or you can do it in addition to, I understand, the Celestron mounting plate. And this one's nice because this recess that is right here is what a bearing recesses into and seats on the focuser assembly of the SCT. And it's really important that that get set into that recess and aligned. And what I found with the Celestron plate and then the original plate that I got with the SCT adapter from Oasis, which was basically a replica of the Celestron plate with the different screw patterns that it needed to mount the focuser, that it had the same problem as the Celestron in that it was very possible to put this and install it and not get the bearing seated exactly in this recess. And then it was possible for that bearing to move back and forth a little bit and actually cause binding on the focuser shaft. And that caused problems. And so I made a recommendation to Astroasis and said, hey, if you made this just a little bit deeper, we could have a much more positive seating of that bearing
and ensure that we don't have any binding or misalignment problems with that focuser shaft. And they did it. I'm really happy about that. And so anyway, I'm going to replace this and the assembly for the adapter for the SCT on the EdgeHD 8. And then we'll go ahead and get the Generation 2 Focuser Rose from Astroasis installed on the SCT. So anyway, we'll got a lot to do and I'm going to move into it. So let's head on in. All right, down here on the table, I've got this was my first telescope. It's an SV Bony SV70 ED, and I had just such a good time with this telescope. I'm going to bring it back into service. It's still great, and I just was able to, with the addition of a field flattener, get images through this telescope that were beyond what I think I ever had an expectation for. Great telescope, inexpensive, perfect starter telescope for astrophotography. Visual is okay. I had some good for the moon. This is not a galaxy telescope, and in my opinion, it's not a planetary telescope by any means. So, I think it's I can't remember exactly 460 millimeters. It's in that neighborhood, and 70 millimeters. It's a very good wide field, large, bright nebula telescope. And anyway, it really does a fine job in that, on those targets. So anyway, to begin with, the first thing that we need to do is remove this coarse focus adjustment knob here. And so I'm going to just find there's 2 set screws here, and I'm going to remove this knob, and I think it's okay. And then that will just slide off. Reserve these parts. It's always good to keep these around. I'm glad I did, because when I took the focuser off and moved it over to my SCT, I was able to remove that again and bring it back and reinstall it on here because I saved all the parts. So we want to keep an eye on the shaft. It's got a groove in it right here for a key, and we want to make sure that we hit that with one of the screws because there's no other flat areas on here. I also need to remove 2 screws here that are going to be for this universal mounting plate. And this plate has a couple screws on it, and we're going to mount that here. And then we're going to mount the adapter plate here, and it will screw together. So we look, that'll screw down to this adapter plate. Before we do that, we want to go ahead and mount this gear assembly on here. You want to make sure that this came assembled from the factory, and we want to make sure that the gear and the pin are lined up. And so those are flush at the top. That's important. In case it comes from the factory, not that way. You'll want to unscrew this set screw and get that aligned correctly. And I am also going to check the tightness of this gear assembly to make sure that it is tightly seated on that shaft, which it is. All right. And now with this keyway here, I want to line up one of these screws with that. So I've got these 2 set screws here. And so I'm going to slide that down, and then I'm going to loosen these up a bit because I want to make sure I get this set fully back. So just make sure that goes all the way down in there. Okay, which it is now. And then I'm going to tighten up this one where that keyway flat is, because that will ensure that it stays lined up and does not spin. We'll tighten this one down opposing it to the side of that shaft. These don't have to be super tight, but you want them snug, so give them just a little bit of a nip, or just to make sure that they are seated. All right, and that feels good. Okay, then we want to take the bearing that comes with this, and we want to slide that on and make sure it's on there and seated, and that will be fine. And then we can, at this point, we're just going to put it on loosely, is slide the mounting plate assembly on there. And this mounting plate assembly and this lower level of the gear right here should be flush, which these are. And I believe that this should be about 8 millimeters to 8.5 millimeters. And that's about 8.81 millimeters. So we can actually, and that might be because it's not mounted yet, but pull that out and remeasure this. It's 8.5 right there. So that's great. That'll be fine. So now I want to remove this top screw, this top grub screw, and this one. So the first and the third one, we're going to leave the second one alone, but these are going to be the holes that we mount the universal adapter. And so we can just remove those and set those screws aside. And then we can grab a couple screws for the universal adapter plate. Make sure I get the right Allen key. Okay, there's that. And then we can mount this. See if I can. And so this just takes the two screws, which go back into the where we just removed those grub screws. Okay, I'm going to leave those loose for the moment. So I want that to be able to slide, because now we're going to connect this bracket here to the universal connector. And so we just got a couple small Allen head screws here that will screw into the universal adapter. Okay, now we can make sure that this is kind of squared up. I'm going to pull that tight together, and then I'll snug both of these. Okay. So now we've got this, and we can move this wherever we want to set the depth. But what I found, and I'll measure it one more time here, and I'm just snugging these up, not overly tight. So now I want to double check this. We should be, they say 8 to 8.5 millimeters. So pulled all the way back. All right, I'm glad I checked that. So that's at 9 right now. So I want to push this forward just slightly so that we get to the 8.5, in between 8 and 8.5. And so I'm going to snug this just a little bit. And at this point, it's not tight. It's just snugged enough that it'll just hold it in place. Okay, so I have this just tight enough here where it's holding it. I might actually need to loosen it just slightly. I just want to get it so it's snug, but I can still nudge it just a little bit without it sliding. Okay, there we go. So now I want to set this between 8 and 8.5 millimeters. And we're at 7.91. Might be easier if I come back and then push up into it. All right. Okay, that's 8.3 right there. 3.5. Well, I'll push it up just slightly. I think we're about 8.25 now. Yeah, that's 8.25. So right in between the specification. I'm good with that. And we'll just give these a snug. And hopefully that didn't move on me. All right, let me double check. You know, last time I did this, I didn't worry about this at all, but I didn't know the spec. And this time, I at least know what the spec is. 8.45 is where I ended up there, so that should be good. All right, now this, I know they sent me in the screws box. I don't recall if this fits or not. They just send this nice little red. No, that doesn't fit. So what I did last time is, I think I left this in here, but I just ensured that it was not tight. And I'm just going to do the same this time. Okay, so with that, we are ready to install the focuser itself. So let me maybe go like this. Should be able to see that okay. So the first thing we want to do is this is a clamp, and this clamp slides over this assembly here and clamps onto it. And that's how you mount this. And it works really well. And this clamp allows you to move this between telescopes too. So if you have multiple adapter assemblies here on different telescopes, you can just take the one focuser and move it back and forth between telescopes, which is super awesome. The first thing we want to do is make sure that this clamp is loosened up. Then this is going to screw down to the focuser body. And there's 3 semi-longer Allen head screws here. Get them lined up. And so we just need to tighten these 3 screws. All right, and just snug them up. It should be good and snug. Again, nothing here is over tight. All right. And then you may want to pay attention to the direction here. So I kind of like to have this so that it is upward. So when we flip the telescope over, I can see this on-off indicator. So I will put that on what appears to be upside down here. Okay. And we also want to, at this point, we want to turn this to the off position. All right. So the clutch is off. We'll put it on upside down. Now I'm going to just turn this to the on position, see if it wants to rotate at all. Okay, so we're good right there. And then I want to tighten up this clamp in this position. And it doesn't have to be, this is just a matter of alignment. So, and this is all visual. It could be rotated in any direction. If you need to rotate in order to accommodate clearances for your cables or anything like that, then you can feel free to rotate this into any position. Let me get a final tighten on this. Actually, let me loosen it just a hair. Make sure I'm fully seated. So I'm pulling back right now with my left hand, making sure that's tight, and then I'm gonna snug this up. I think I'm there. All right. So now engaged, disengaged. Again, very important when you're using the autofocuser that the focus lock is not tightened down. Okay, you do not want that tightened down. And you can even remove this if you want. I'm going to leave it in there, but I'm not tightening it. So now with this off, I'm able to rack the focuser, right? If I engage this, I'm no longer able to rack the focuser because it's locked in by the gears. So we know that we have gear mesh. Disengage the clutch, and we again can manually focus this, both fine and coarse adjustment. Well, the way I use this is I'll find my manual focus and rack that, and then lock it when I get good manual focus, and then I'll refine that in autofocus then with this engaged. And I think it's important to note, if you take your focuser and move it to its fullest extent in, whatever that may be, and then let the Oasis focuser set it on 0 all the way back, and then set the Oasis focuser to go ahead and travel as far out as you can get it, then you can then measure the distance and calculate what your actual step size is to use for autofocus. With that, we are pretty much done on the refractor, and I'm going to move over to the installation on the SCT. So yeah, so with that, we're pretty much done with the installation on the refractor of the Oasis Gen 1. And again, refer back to that video that I linked if you need any more details, but I covered it pretty well there. That should get you through an install, I think. If you need more info, go back to the other video or definitely let me know in comments. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and move into the installation of the Gen 2 on my SCT next. All right, so things are a little bit more crowded now, and I'll probably have to reposition this a little bit. I'm going to start out with this flat and kind of work around it a little bit here with the other camera view so that you can see what I'm doing, but I'm having a hard time seeing what I'm doing. So at some point I'm going to have to reposition this, and I'll reposition the camera so that I can work on it more easily. With the front cover on here, I'll be able to set this telescope up on end, which I think will be a preferable way to actually work on this. But to get started, I'll have it flat here, and we'll move over to the other camera view, and I'm going to remove the SCT adapter to begin with. Okay, so the SCT adapter is this component right here, and it is made up of this cage assembly, which is the black part, and then it has a manual focus ring or thumb screw here, which is knurled, which is how you manually focus this when you disengage the clutch of the focuser. And then it has the gear, which meshes with the focuser motor so that it can control the focus. So the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and I'm going to loosen up these two set screws in this assembly here so that it's not bound on anything, because when I take this out, this will all come out together. We'll just loosen those. And they don't have to come all the way out, just get them loose. See if I can do this without actually seeing it. Loosen this one. Guess I can rotate it. Okay, so that's loose, and so now this can move freely in there. And then with a Phillips screwdriver, I want to remove these cage screws here. I think there's 3 of them. Now, one thing I found when I'm putting this back in is these cage screws can cause a little bit of uneven clamping force on this cage and cause binding. And so it's really important when I'm putting this back. Let's see, there's 4 screws. There's one longer one here that I evenly tighten these. And we can kind of do that by feel. It's down here on the bottom. Okay, we'll loosen that up. Okay, and then that whole assembly will come off. So 4 Phillips head screws right here that connect this cage. This cage will slide off the top. And in this cage, there's one long screw and then 3 shorter screws around this frame here. And inside, and this can pop out, is the bearing for this. And so we can just go ahead and pull that out for right now. So we'll set the cage there and the bearing. And then there's another bearing inside this. These are the same size bearings. That goes inside this manual adjustment manual focus knob. And then we also have this gear here. And I've got new gears. And so I think I'm going to take this off when I go to reinstall it and try one of the new gears just because it's new. So the next thing I want to do is, so this is that plate that I was talking about, and I'm going to remove this and we can take a look at this plate compared to other plate. And these just have some Phillips screws that hold it in place. We'll back those out. And so there's 3 of those. Okay, and that allows that plate to come out. So there's the 3 screws. And then that is the bearing. Now this will actually move in and out. And so that's the bearing that we want to seat on. It fits inside this recess right here. Now with the 8-inch SCT, we've got this screw here at the end of the focus shaft. And I'm just going to double check and make sure. Now, one thing to note here, so now you can really see that I'm able to, without this plate being installed, I'm able to move that. And so it can shift from side to side. That's why it's so important that that bearing fit inside that recess. Not the same bearing, but as you can see, it sits. This bearing here will sit inside that recess and lock into place. And that's important. We can basically, what I like to do is I'm going to pull this focuser out just a little bit. We can take this plate, make sure it's seated on the bearing. This might be easier from the top. All right, I'm going to reposition now. Okay, I think this is a pretty decent view. Be able to see this on camera pretty good. So what I want is to get this mounting plate mounted on here, but I want to get this focuser assembly centered so that it's seated. We'll get these 3 screw holes lined up. Not tightening those yet, but we will in a moment. Now, I just want to make sure that this is centered, feeling seated, and we'll go ahead and snug these down. I'll go around in a pattern on these so that this snugs somewhat evenly. And these get tightened pretty tight. And then we can install this manual focus knob. I think there's just one. Okay, yeah. So I'll just slide that back on. So I want to go back on with the same one. So this one compared to the old one, those two are the same. We'll slide that on and let's see. Looking to see if, yeah, there's a flat on this. So we will want to make sure that the set screw goes to the flat. And let me grab the set screw out of here. I probably got a new one, but we'll try very hard not to drop it. Install it into this gear. Feel a lot better when that's feels like it's started. Okay, got it started now. Now I want to make sure that's lined up with the flat. Just so it starts to touch. That should be it right there. Okay, we'll tighten that up. This will be pretty snug here. I want to make sure that this gear doesn't have any chance of rotating around this shaft. Okay. And then we want to go ahead and reinstall the cage. But first we need to install our bearing here. So actually go. So install our first bearing. Make sure that's seated. Our second bearing will go around here. And then our cage will come over the top of that. I'm going to orient the cage so that this is open along the top here. So I'll start with affixing the cage here to the scope. And we'll start with this long screw. So there's a bunch of screw holes around here to accommodate rotating this. So once you find one, and I'm just going to take it, okay, and loosen it up. I don't want that to be tight at all. And we'll go around and do the other 3 screws. And again, I'm not tightening anything yet because I need to make sure that these tighten down evenly around this to avoid any binding. And you'll be able to feel it in the manual thumb screw for the manual focus. All right, and then the 4th one, it's on the back side here. Okay, so now just want to go through, I'm going to push down so this is kind of seated as evenly as I can get it, and then I'm going to just go around and touch these off. Not tightening yet, I'm just getting them touched off so they're even. Okay, make sure everything feels set. Able to move that without any resistance. So now I'm going to begin snugging. So I'm going to do just like I don't know, maybe a 16th of a turn. I'm going to go across to the other side, do the same thing. Okay, come over to this side, and then come over to this side. Now I'm going to check this. How's it feel? Feels good. Okay, no binding. I'll do the same thing. Okay, no binding. This time I'm going to go for snug. All right. All right. No binding. Feels really good. Okay, I think this will be the last one. Just going to take it home. And you definitely don't want to do this so tight. You risk stripping these, this is good and tight. So, and you should be able to freely move this. If you feel this start binding up, then you'll need to take a look at loosening these screws here and getting them more evenly tightened. And definitely do opposites like what I'm doing here. Okay, I don't know that I got much more to go here. This one still felt like it had a little bit. I think I'm there now. So let's just make sure the rest of these are good. And we'll check free play one more time. So what these all feel like, they're all bottomed out, and I would really have to reef on it to get any additional tightness, and that feels like it would be over tight. So I've got nice free play here. That's really good. I'm going to double check tightness on this gear set screw. And then we are ready to, so we've got our new clamp here, and we're going to attach it like we did the other one to the focuser rose. So let me find the screws for that. And here's my box of screws. It says so right there. And these are the three, these are longer ones. They sent me an extra, which is nice. All right. And then try to work on this up here where you can see it. So I'm just going to place these three screws, get them started. And I've already got the clamped screw in here. So at this point, what I want to do is go ahead and tighten down this manual adjustment knob onto the shaft. And there's two that we want to make sure are tight. All right. And I like these to be good and snug on that brass ring around the focuser shaft as well. We don't want any slippage. These two screws right here are what makes the positive contact to the focuser shaft so that the focus motor can spin it. So now that we are firmly connected to the focuser shaft, let's double check this again. How does it feel? Now it feels a little snugger because we're actually turning the focuser, and that feels good. All right, and then this, we want to make sure we turn this to off, and then we can fit this on. Make sure we have clearances, okay, and figure out where we want this. So for me, I'm going to use the USB-C and the temperature control, and I want those to be as far away from the center here as I can get them so that I don't have any cable interference with my OAG or my filter wheel. And I'm really happy about this being shorter now because when it stuck out further, I was actually getting the cable ends were getting into the electronic filter wheel, and I was having some clearance problems with trying to do rotation. So I'm hoping that this improves. So basically, I want to get these two as far away from the center as I can. So that looks good to me right there. I'll be able to see the on off, no problem. And then I need to get the larger Allen key. I'm going to push down, tighten up this clamp. And this gets good and snug here because this is what holds the entire focus motor on here and keeps it from spinning against the torque of the motor. Okay, that feels good. So now we should be able to rotate and positively engage into the gears. temp controls over here when it's engaged, so I may want to make an adjustment. I think I will, to rotate that just slightly. And I may have to adjust this one more time once I get the image train on here and everything, so that I can sure and do any final tweaks to it. Okay, so when this is fully engaged, I want this rotated. I'm gonna loosen this up a little bit more. All right, fully engaged. I want these two as far away as I can get them. So I'll rotate that like there, go further. Let's get better. I think about right there, if that makes sense. So basically I'm looking at where the cables come in here to get them as far away from the image train as I can, so I don't have any cable clearance problems. Which is kind of nice because I've got the indicator, whether it's on or off, on top, which will be convenient to see. Give this a final tightening here. Okay, that feels good. So that's focuser engaged. I've got my cables as far away as I can get them from the image train. And then when I want to disengage it, it's there. When disengaged, I can rotate the manual focuser. When engaged, the manual focuser is locked. So that completes the installation of the Astroasis Generation 2 Focuser Rose here. The next thing will just be getting this set up out on the mount and getting everything wired together, and then we can take a look at the software, because I want to make sure that the Bluetooth software still works with this. But if it doesn't, that's okay with me. The only place I actually use that is on my refractor, but it's really convenient. And in fact, in my last video that I linked to, part of that video has the software part in it, so I might just actually refer to that. But yeah, it's not needed for the SCT. And but you can certainly use it if you want to use it instead of manually, but I never have a reason to. But I did use it for measuring my step size on the SCT by measuring the travel of the focuser racking, and then dividing that out and to get the step size, which worked out really well. All right, so the Astroasis Oasis Gen 2 is installed on my EdgeHD 8, and I put the Gen 1 on my SV Bony SV503 70 ED, and I love that scope. I got to tell you, it just was a great beginner scope, and it exceeded my expectations. It did require that I add a field flattener to it to bring it up to par, but after I did that, it was really great. The Hotech field flattener is the one that I use. I actually have a link for that down in my gear, down in the description. I highly recommend that one. So the Astroasis links are in the description for the focuser and for the documentation. I hope that this video has helped you if you are in the process of installing or inquiring for more information about the Astroasis electronic focusers. I definitely stand behind them. It's a great company, amazing customer support. I really appreciate Astroasis as a company and organization and how they treat their customers. If you are planning on making purchases here for the holidays and you would like to use an affiliate link to help support my channel, those links allow you to make a purchase at no additional cost to you, but I get a small commission from those purchases. That helps me out a lot. I would really appreciate it if you consider doing that. I would love to have you as a channel member. You can become a member, get perks, which include pre-release to access to these videos and much more. If you like my content and would like to help keep supporting me to keep creating this content, then becoming a channel member would be so much appreciated. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you found it helpful. And my name is Doug, and this is Astro AF.